Welcome to this week's episode of The Appetite, a podcast that explores one's appetite for life as it relates to food, body, and mental health. We are clinicians from Opal Food and Body Wisdom, an eating disorder treatment center in Seattle, Washington. I'm your host, Carter Umhow, and I'm joined by the Opal founders,
Dr. Lexi Giblin,
Kara Bazzi,
Julie Church.
Over the last two episodes, we introduced ourselves through the lenses of radically open dialectical behavioral therapy and health at every size. Today, we're introducing a third tenet, also close to our hearts, sport and exercise. Therapist and co-founder Kara Bazzi is our point person today and brings her expertise as the director and creator of Opal's sport and exercise program. In this conversation, she introduces the idea that movement is our birthright. This idea breaks open the category of exercise and suggests that movement isn't just about getting fit, and therefore it could be a place of actual great joy. You guys ready?
I think so.
Okay. So a huge part of reimagining one's relationship with their body is reimagining their relationship with movement and exercise.
Yes.
And Kara, you have a probably pretty particular way of conceptualizing this.
Yes.
Can you kind of explain your paradigm?
Yeah. So we're going to go big picture today in today's podcast with this idea that movement is our birthright, so that we are born with the right or the privilege to which a person is entitled by birth to move. So it is just simply saying that because we are human, we are movers in the world. We're born movers. And we may have different types of limitations as movers, but each and every one of us are born to use our bodies in that way, which I think is really exciting and expansive, especially when we think about how that relates to us as adults. But I want to start by I thought it would be fun to kind of paint a picture of a scene on a playground with some kiddos, because a lot of us can relate to having children in our lives and what we can observe from kids moving that really have more, I would say, a more free relationship with their bodies and with moving. So think about, a Sunday afternoon at the park, sunny outside, maybe, 20, 30 kids running around on a playground structure. And imagine you have, a couple boys that have this fierce look on their face as they're playing tag and trying to catch the other kid. And you see the kind of competitiveness and drive to get this kiddo. And then you imagine having this other boy maybe off to the side by himself, and he's got a stick, and he's kind of creating some kind of imaginary play with his stick. And then maybe there's a group of girls that are on the merry-go-round, and they're socializing and laughing and enjoying pushing each other and going fast and going slow on that playground. And then you have maybe the kid that's in the sand pit and just totally focused on using the structure of the little machinery to dig for sand. So I think it's, a playground is an amazing picture to show how movers are all different. We have different tastes. We have different proclivities towards the way we want to move our body. And the sad part is that as we get older, some of that just natural way of moving into our body gets changed. And there's becomes more breaking of that trust with how our body would naturally move. And, this is a conversation we ask our clients and have them explore is, where did this natural way of moving get thwarted in your life? Where did you break trust? And, I think that's a really good question to ask ourselves is, where did that happen? And often the answers from the clients are, gosh, it was really when some form or another external messages took over, whether that was numbers or being quantifiable. Morality is a big one.
What do you mean by morality? How would that play out?
Just one way is better than the other.
Okay.
I think one of the big things with exercise is, which is really unfortunate, is there's often a hierarchy. Athletes get revered in our culture, and highly competitive athletes, people that exercise in a particular way, and we start to see that certain forms of activity get legitimized, and others. People don't even consider movement. I think that's even one of those aha moments of, do you realize that gardening is movement? Doing what you love can be movement. And yet there's a lot of, pressures and expectations about how you might end up developing and where you might end up going. And often that can come from parents, the pressure that can come from coaches, that can come from school systems. But where did this get thwarted? So I think that's a really interesting question. I'm curious, even just by saying that for all of us in here, like what do you know about your own relationship with movement, of where you'd say trust started to get broken about having to be a certain way to move and expectations being put on you versus just naturally moving and living into that?
Wow. Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
I was just going to say, I think that it was really pretty early in middle school, seeing social pressures. And I think some of that hierarchy of what was, which sports were at the school that then was even offered to the girls and what was being affirmed to participate in, I guess I would say. And then I would say family too. So like I have a lot of strong family sport ties that then also pushed me sometimes to pursue that sport and sometimes to not pursue it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, Kara, I was thinking about how you were talking about movement and defining movement, and then all of a sudden you started talking about exercise, and that word came into the picture.
Totally.
And
I thought about you as an artist, actually, when
Really?
she was talking about that too.
Well,
Yeah.
how so?
The gardening example, because I was
Yeah.
thinking, are you envisioning a canvas
Yes.
and the movement that comes along with a canvas as an artist? But
Totally.
anyways,
Yes. I mean, in a lot of ways, I would say that the idea of thinking about movement as a separate category was something later on in life that I started thinking about. I definitely knew that I needed to get things out of my body, and I found art to do that. Like, I remember using like a palette knife to paint and loving to kind of carve into the canvas and have my arms all over the place and move toward the canvas and away from it. But I didn't ever think about that as important in terms of my body. I thought my body was supposed to just exercise. So for me, I think that I probably started hating movement, and my relationship to it was thwarted around the time that I started realizing that my my role on the soccer team or my role on the basketball team didn't make the A team. I had to be on the B team. Was just like I wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
Or I loved something enough, but I didn't
Yeah.
cut it.
Yeah.
Or everyone else was really intense and competitive on the soccer field, and I was not so great.
Yeah.
I went to a small school and was I was captain, but I was captain for my character, definitely not for my capability.
Yeah. And it's so sad because we can get to the point where we would say, oh, that's really cool at this age, right? Of saying, oh, that's so cool that I got honored for my character. But as a kid,
Not so cool.
It's not so cool.
Yeah.
You want to be the best, the MVP is what's most kids are trying to go for that. And I just think, I coached my youngest daughter's soccer team and I had to do those awards. And, that was actually really hard I was so thoughtful about what awards I was going to give out to each of my my daughter's friends, including my daughter. And yet I hurt one of the girls' feelings because what I thought was a really good trait to honor in her, it wasn't about her soccer skill. And that was really hard for that girl. So then we had to have a follow-up conversation.
Wow.
But there's a lot that gets expressed through sport and exercise, and a lot of feelings. And I think even talking about those different expressions, part of that is knowing that we're different from each other. And I think that, I think that's one of the challenges as parents, is often if we can't recognize the ways we're different from our kids, then we might try to push our kids into what we value or something that we, maybe didn't get expressed when we were younger. I know that certainly, I think there was a little bit of that going on between my dad and I in my childhood.
It is a really tricky thing to imagine, just movement for the sake of movement, and that being something that's not married to pressure.
Right.
Not married to expectation,
Right.
or even weight loss within this culture.
Totally.
So yeah, it's easy for that to suddenly become this really this hotbed
Yes.
of getting to play out a ton of different
Yes.
relational things or emotional things, all on the soccer field or all running or whatever it is.
One of the best conversations that we have in our Rethinking Exercise and Sport process group at Opal is when we start to tie in the important human needs in relationship to exercise, movement, and sport. And so much comes out of that conversation. And when I talk about important human needs, I'm talking about needs such as physical safety and security, friendship, attention of others, respect, validation, nurturing, physically touching and being touched, sense of accomplishment, making a contribution, fun and play. And there's more needs than that, but this idea of how many needs do get met through your relationship with movement. And I think when we're living into movement as our birthright, there's more openness and expansiveness to have a lot more needs getting met. And we start to see that when that trust gets broken, we start to get into more disordered relationship, those human needs really start to shrink, and there's very little needs being met in relation to sport or movement. Mm-hmm. What would you guys say in terms of Lexi?
Well, I'm still back on the broken trust piece.
Yeah, I want to hear your answer.
Yeah, because I'm not totally clear on what that even means. Like broken trust with, say more about it.
Yeah, I think broken trust with claiming movement as our birthright.
Okay. So like losing trust in.
So believing that you have to force kind of yourself into a particular way with movement because you won't just naturally be a mover. Mm-hmm. Like you don't believe, it's kind of like the trust with the eating, right? So can I trust my body to respond to food and stop when I fall, eat when I'm hungry, nurturing yourself through food, similarly nurturing ourselves through movement.
Yeah.
And where that, kids, there's not thought about that. They often, I guess some kids get introduced to some things that break some of that trust early on, but for some kids, they just get to move how they feel free moving.
Yeah. So like trust would be broken when I start to have like more shoulds come in. Like I should be doing this.
Right.
So that's in those terms would be you're not necessarily following what your body's necessarily wanting to do. You're more in your over control with it. Like I should be doing this. So I've got to check this box.
Totally. Yeah. And where that shows up in expression of movement often comes into a continuum of either avoiding it or having more compulsive relationship with movement, right? Yeah. So oftentimes, I would believe if somebody is avoiding movement really significantly, it's not because they just don't want to be moving. It's because there's probably some shoulds and a bunch of stuff going on that create the avoidance. Mm-hmm. So it gets expressed in either of those ways.
Yeah. Well, right now I'm dealing with an injury, and wow, it really highlights how much movement is essential part of my life and has been since I was young, and how many of my needs get met through movement when you're at all compromised. And I don't know that I've ever dealt with it to this degree. Yeah. So I'm feeling it's interesting we're talking about this today because I feel more tender around this subject today. Yeah. But listening to all the, it's like even this moment of like worrying, what if I'm compromised the rest of my life in terms of movement? And what is that going to mean to me? Because it's sport and athletics have been they're central to my identity and my so many things, so many needs are met. Totally. Connection. I'm feel so grateful in recent years. I feel like I've gotten to be closer to my dad through my re-engagement with cycling, and it's just such a so I don't know. I'm having a lot of emotion as we talk about this today,
which I would say is so. That is actually we talk about injury and retirement and in relation to this, because oftentimes it's through being pulled away, not at your own choice, where this really gets highlighted of not recognizing how much goes into that relationship, because there's it's just, these are those things that we don't talk about that much, which I love bringing this more to people's awareness because it is such a big deal.
And you don't know your movement privilege until it gets threatened.
Totally.
And I think I'm encountering that for maybe one of the first times in my life in a real way.
Totally.
Where it's really compromised. So
yeah. And then, it's so interesting too, because then people have limitations. Maybe there's something gets brought on by an injury or, other forms of limitations maybe that were over time. And then there's almost a way of, there's not often an allowance to go through the grief. And to go through the grief helps us get to the other side where we can find ways that our human needs can still be met through movement in a more limited way. But it's, but that's difficult. Often we don't allow ourselves to go through that grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I would see that somebody would repeatedly try. Well, either think they'll never do it again because they can't do X activity
Right.
ever again.
right.
So then they're never going to have those needs met, or they just keep on trying to get the square peg in the round
Totally.
hole, or the round,
Right.
that mix. And especially for somebody that would have an experience of connecting with all of those and having a lot of those
Yes.
needs met. I think of people that might have maybe not, or I don't know how listeners might be listening to this that have had limitations their whole life, right? In terms of like significant limitations physically. And I don't know how you would speak to them or in this
Opal
conversation.
body. Yes, that was actually a conversation we recently had where there was a reaction from the group coming up. Well, what about people who are not able-bodied and have severe physical limitation? And what does that mean that movement is their birthright when they don't? What if they're quadriplegic? What if they're and someone actually in the group, another client, talked about this beautiful story of someone who was a quadriplegic and had, learned how to go about the world with their mouth and using a paintbrush or something, I can't remember, to kind of orient themselves to their world. And that's movement. I mean, I think that I remember going so far with one of my clients at one point of talking about when you're pushing the elevator button, you are using movement, like broad. And I know I was being I was being provocative in that statement, but it's true. Like we so quickly will disregard if it's not exercise, gym, running, CrossFit, if it's not these particular forms of movement, there's often just, a discrediting. And I like the idea of just why do we think that way? Asking those questions, where do we get there? And what prevents us from having a more expansive idea of what movement is? But sometimes it's because they haven't gone through the grief that they don't, that could be the barrier for having a more expansive idea if they're stuck in, anger and
I will not
despair.
get that.
Yeah. I'm screwed,
Because grief updates our understanding of our new circumstances. So if you don't go
Totally.
through that, you're
Yes.
stuck in the past
Totally.
in a lot of ways.
Oh, and we see, one of the coolest things at Opal is we have this movement group and we're doing all kinds of things like, traditional sports like volleyball and basketball, but we're doing ping pong, we're doing Feldenkrais, we're doing paddleboarding, we're doing, dancing, we're doing all these different forms of bowling and
We even did improv in there once.
improv. Yeah. All these incredible ways that we can engage in the world. And it just opens up some creativity too of, it might take a little bit more effort to do those things. But man, when we open up our lens, it's pretty exciting.
Yes. I was just thinking too about how a lot of the things that can be expressed in more traditional sports or exercise category, I don't think that they're necessarily as acceptable other places too.
Yeah.
Just thinking about being competitive or being aggressive, especially for women, I think that can be a place where it's like the only place you're allowed to get kind of rough or
Yeah.
the only place you're allowed to really get your energy out in a way
Oh,
that's
yeah.
acceptable socially.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what would happen if you were really thoughtful about pushing the elevator button or again, that might be a little bit of a stretch, but like really thoughtful about being aggressive in the way that you were physically writing on a page and letting yourself be embodied in that moment enough to get some aggression out.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know.
Like
there's-
music, musicians.
Absolutely.
Like that's maybe a place where they could have more
Yeah.
of that.
Beethoven on the piano. I mean,
Yeah.
is that not
Aggressive.
physical or what? Right?
Yes.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
interesting that we limit ourselves to this very narrow category when actually we're always in a body the whole day.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Oh man.
But
I do think of team in that though too,
Oh,
and how
yes.
it teaches. I mean, I think that's one of the things when I
sport teams.
Yes. And just like the benefits of collaboration and working together and learning from others and having leadership and knowing how to engage with an authority
Totally.
figure and a leader and learning from somebody
Yes.
that knows something better than you do.
Yes.
I don't know. I just, that's
is
something that
big in
happens a
this.
lot with like I think in a parenting sense, coming back to that, is the parents' desire for kids to learn in an environment like a team,
Right.
Yeah.
collaborative learning. And so
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I think that draws
Mm-hmm.
maybe parents to put kids into those kinds of environments if they can't, if their family environment doesn't offer that, but maybe my experience is limited because it has more of the sport focused collaboration and
it's-
team environment.
yeah,
But there's
it's so
probably other
true.
ways that there's that
Yeah.
team that you could be a part. Music, I think
Yeah.
for sure allows for
Theater.
Yeah.
team. Theater does.
That would be a big one.
Huge
Yeah.
one, that with movement and team. But I didn't do that.
Yeah, with our clients, that are all 20s, 30s, 40s, the very similar story is a lot of them did youth sports,
Yeah.
and then didn't continue into sports in their adulthood, and then often what they would do with their exercise and movement is then do something that's much more isolative, right? Like a lot more individual of the gym, running, are probably the most common. And what I see from the human needs list is they had lots of these needs met through their youth sports. And then as they either retired or got injured or maybe even got more into to a more disordered place, then they would cluster around these needs of a sense of accomplishment, progress, and competency. And within that started kind of trickling over to this more compulsive side of movement. And then in that compulsive side, and it kind of shows up in eating, shows up in a lot of different ways, then sadly, it doesn't leave as much space for the other human needs to be met in their life. So it has kind of this reverse effect. And so I think just shedding light on that is really useful. I just think there's to have awareness of that going on, and then what is that? Then what, right? Like that. How do you kind of move forward in both your relationship with movement and outside of movement when it comes to the needs?
Thinking about how, and we talked about this with Hayes last week, actually we've talked about it in every podcast so far. In some ways, a lot of these issues feel American, like with RO kind of being over-controlled. We talked about that being like sort of an American thing. Maybe we talked about it less with Hayes. Anyway, I was thinking about those cluster of needs there, that feels like, again, this emphasis on performance and excellence and productivity in a really interesting way. And if there's an overemphasis on that within our culture and we need to somehow figure out how to accomplish something, we're feeling inadequate in all these other ways because there's pressure to be excellent or perfect, then we take it out in our exercise.
Totally.
Or we take it out on the food and don't get to easily have a sense of accomplishment in many other places. And of course, then that's also overemphasized and held as more important as other needs rather than connection and relaxation or
pleasure
else. Pleasure.
Pleasure is a big one that gets lost.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a good lead in to one of the things that I had wanted to share about where research fits into this, and what we bring into our work at Opal with our clients is kind of the research that backs up that it's actually the qualitative aspects of exercise that are related to disordered exercise instead of the quantitative. So when you think of quantitative, you think of numbers, right? How much, mode, intensity, frequency of your exercise. And the qualitative is how do we relate to those things? What are the psychological aspects? And literature has shown that it's the qualitative part of the relationship with exercise that leads to the pathology, and compulsivity being kind of the culprit. And within that, so we talk about these things at Opal. The four main correlates are eating psychopathology, which is a fancy way of saying body shaping, or as a means for compensating for eating food. Affect regulation. So a lot of times, we know exercise is a stress relief, but if kind of, so to speak, if we put all our eggs in that one basket, that exercising is going to be the way to mediate negative affect, and that's fully relied upon, then that can be problematic. And then the third correlate is obsessive compulsiveness, and the fourth is perfectionism. So those are we're actually targeting those 4 correlates as we're working with our clients, both in process groups and in individual exercise experientials, as the key things that lead someone to having a more compulsive or a more avoidant relationship to exercise.
So one thing I think is always helpful to clarify. So you're saying somebody could be training for ultra endurance marathons and running 70 miles a week and super, that is like, it takes up a lot of their time and attention. And that in of itself wouldn't be disordered if their attitudes with food, their, I don't know.
Perfectionism,
all those
mood
things.
regulation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Those things are in line. Like those things aren't
Right.
getting interrupted in their
Right.
life. They can be putting in ton of time and attention and resources into that exercise.
Right. That is what I'm saying. And yes, it could be that they're doing that, and the qualitative part is also at play. But just because they're training for an ultra does not mean it's disordered. And to go on the flip side, you could have somebody who is doing a 5-minute routine of abs every morning that is disordered. It's 5 minutes, but the way that they are approaching this little ab workout for 5 minutes could be very disordered in the sense that it could be completely an obsessive process and perfectionistic. And, if they don't do this ab workout, they could be a wreck, an emotional wreck for the rest of the day.
I was just thinking about how within our line of work, like using the word disordered is really normal. And thinking about how many magazines probably on the stands right now say something about a 5-minute workout.
Oh, yeah.
Like how normal that
Yeah,
is.
totally.
And how you even had said that part of the qualitative is an emphasis on body sculpting.
Yep.
I mean, that would be kind of shocking maybe for most people in this country to think that you're not supposed to sculpt your body.
Well, and I think a lot of people believe that there are people. I would think that a lot of people would believe that no one, like, how would I put it? That nobody is exercising if they're not interested in body shaping. I know that might be a double negative, but does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense.
So if I were to say that body shaping is not at all a part of my experience with movement, which is true, they wouldn't believe me. They would think I'm lying. Because the belief is just, of course, everyone is either there to maintain, lose, sculpt.
So this, again, goes back to the idea that we are meant to be movers rather than exercisers. And exercise as a way of body sculpting or a way of weight loss. I think that's kind of the common way to think about it. Is something to sort of reframe and think about, okay, why do we need to move? How do you actually restore your relationship with exercise and movement when you realize that it doesn't have to be about that?
Yeah.
It seems like a kind of a dark wood.
Well, to ask the
walking
question, if you knew you could not change your body, period, what would you do to move your body?
I love that question. Should we answer it?
Go for it.
What would we do? Oh my gosh.
If you knew that anything you did wouldn't do a single thing aesthetically.
I've been thinking about my relationship to running recently, where I definitely did it compulsively at some point. And I do it every once in a while now, but not a ton. And I keep fantasizing about running right now. And I'm not listening to that for some reason, but I just keep fantasizing about running really, really fast. And preferably through the woods, actually. That just sounds so nice. This fall weather, and I just want to run really fast.
Kind of just bolt through.
Yeah. And I probably would hurt my knee, but if I didn't, if I could work up to that, that is exactly what I would want to do right now for something in my spirit right now that feels lacking. Like the rest of my life right now feels very stable, and very calm, which is lovely. But there's a part of me that like really wants to just move,
kind of the
fast.
wildness of it too.
Yeah, and so it feels like this expression of my desire for wildness and my desire to to be a little bit impulsive sometimes, in a way that feels like it lets me loose, rather than I'm running away from something.
Totally.
So that is the thing that I'm thinking about right now in terms of movement. Like, what is it that my spirit needs too?
Totally.
And often it's, I mean, that actually goes all across the board. Sometimes it is painting, like I mentioned, but
what you're listening to your hunger, you're listening to whatever is
Right.
kind of deep within, right?
Exactly.
And what is an expression of that? It reminds me of this day, I'll call this was probably about a year ago, and we have a place up on Whidbey Island. And we finally made the ferry, and me and the kids drove up. I don't remember if my husband was there, but I just was like, get me out on the beach. And I just sprint on the beach, and the kids follow me, and we're sprinting down right. I think it was the sun had set. It was still a little bit, you could still see outside, but the sun was setting. And it was just this, it reminded me like wild and free. And my body just wanted, it just craved that.
Yep.
And it felt so good. And then it was fun to have my kids both be kind of in the same, they loved it. They just sprinted after me, and we ran down the end of the beach, and our hair is, wild, and it's getting dark, and it felt so good.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
I seem to be, it's interesting to think about this question, because I think what I have been doing is wanting to kind of be free of any demands placed on me.
Totally.
And I think exercise is a place that I can find that. I can just go and
Sense of,
that sense of freedom. Yeah. And the almost like a altered consciousness. Like I will start with one mood or one mindset, but then through it somehow I shift, and life feels suddenly like a different place. And so I often will crave the feeling that I will have after also.
Totally.
So I can see how those are places in my life that I am lacking right now, and I can see how I'm trying to get that in exercise without any, those are not motivated by body shaping. Yeah. And I can see how, so it's interesting to hear these different conversations about sport, and I'm thinking about how much of life is mirrored in our sport and our movement, and vice versa. Like it's just kind of a parallel.
Totally.
There's a lot of metaphor that's happening in our movement.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. Yeah, that was where I was going to share about what I would crave. Is at this point, there's a lot of limitations in my life in regards to movement. But right now, the thing that I'm craving is to actually go into a gym, which is not an environment where I like to go. But YMCA, I'll give a shout out to the YMCA because I like the Y and the environment of it. But actually to be led. So that same craving, I desire to be led, and I really like going to these organized classes and just be led through it.
Yeah.
It's much less mindless, and so that I love that. I do not want to go and try to think about where I'm going to go or what I'm going to do or what apparatus I need. Please tell me what to take from the shelves and then give me a space. Tell me actually where to stand. I actually asked the woman last time I went in there, where do you think, where would you like me? I've never been to this class. Where would you like me?
Oh, I like that.
And right in front of her, she said. I was like,
that's
okay.
so sweet. Yes,
Oh my gosh,
Great.
I love it.
I'd love to watch you and mirror you.
Yes.
But anyway, so I would just crave. Yeah. And it's interesting to try to even answer that question in the state of mind I have around movement right now. Because it's like all the limitations come up. All the barriers, all the reasons I can't, so it's not an ezy, because body sculpting isn't something, I've done my work to not have that be the motive. So that's kind of like, what would you do if you weren't even thinking about body sculpting? I have so many other reasons why I don't go exercise.
Totally. Well, and if you think of it kind of being the birthright,
And move.
so we're born to move, but our appetites are different. The full picture is different of all the other things that we're attending to, right? So it could be it does look, it's so individual. It looks so different for different people, and it might bring up grief and loss of not being able to have to kind of feast on the way that you'd want to with movement.
Yeah. And I'm like, I want to do these things and kind of maybe deal with some of the, what would I say, the negative aspects of it, like having to go into a gym and the things about that I don't like, to enable me to be able to be ready for ski season, to be with my kids and my husband and enjoy the snow and go through the powder and not be totally wiped out. And so I think about that, like, okay, what will I be able to deal with? Like what, that I've done my work to be able to tolerate
Right.
in some of these environments, but that's just in my life right now. These are the
Totally.
limitations. Like I probably need to use a gym.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
That's one
So-
thing about aging. Yeah. I mean, to have like part of doing things for particular reasons to be able to do other things.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And I think
And
It's
I-
not being a motivation.
Yeah, with our clients, I think they do the things for those needs to be met, and that's it.
Right.
But I think of also like the process of some of the clients saying like, okay, well, I'm going to do these things to be able to go on that hike. I
But
hear-
there's freedom in that.
Yeah.
Because you're doing it for the freedom or the independence or the ability to meet
yeah,
need in the
Yeah.
other.
yeah,
And if we're talking about movement as metaphor, then there are so many things in life that we have to tolerate, and
Right.
so many
To
things
do
in
it.
life that we move through and get through because we know there's something better on the other side for us. And to think that movement or anything else is just supposed to be about this like huge blissful impulse.
yeah,
That's not. If
Unrealistic.
it's supposed to reflect all these different needs,
right.
Right.
Yeah.
or allow us to be met in all these different needs, then it's gonna be hard sometimes too. Which I think is maybe not what everyone thinks of too when they imagine movement as birthright.
Right.
It would always be lovely,
Right.
kind of like with food. Like
Right.
if you don't have to have something perfect every time.
Exactly.
for it to be
exactly. Sometimes you're doing
okay.
something for, like, even with sport with food, right? Like you're having mechanical eating around around your performance or your competition or your training
Yeah.
because you need it.
hmm
Yeah.
I love this idea of metaphor of movement. It reminded me of probably the place where I had started really reclaiming different relationship, which was through dance, which was shocking because I've never taken a dance class in my life.
Yeah.
Still haven't.
I've taken your dance class.
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to talk about.
It's so
I've
incredible,
taught that,
Carter.
but I've never taken one.
Oh,
When I was in college, there was a dance improv class that was offered, and I was thinking about it just because there was a resource on the syllabus that I thought was really cool, and I was like, I'll just try that. And I loved it, and it was because I engaged for the first time this idea of metaphor in our movement and being able to explore all these different therapeutic things by moving. And yeah, Lexi, you were talking about dancing in the dark, which
Dancing
is
in
what
the
we do with the
dark, yeah.
clients, where we haven't done it in a long time. But
Carter leads this amazing class. It was so moving.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was something that I started with some other students when I was in grad school around exploring what movement and dance had to do with therapy or how we could express one through the other.
Yeah.
And it became a place where suddenly you're describing your movement of what you just did for the 30 minutes in the dark with some music playing or maybe no music playing at all. And you're speaking some things about your needs. You're using language that reflects kind of where you are or how you're reflecting on different parts of your life or relationships. And it's really cool to hear everyone else's descriptions of what they're thinking about in terms of movement right now, because it's always a metaphor for something deeper.
Yeah.
It always
And
is.
I always think, I'm such a sports fan, and I get tearful when, the team loses or the kick is missed. And I assume that it touches on something really deep in us as a human, right? It's not, there's life that you're seeing in kind of a short little snippet
Yes.
in an athlete's life that just touches something deep for us. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like you didn't say much, Kara, about kind of how you're exploring this right now in particular.
Gosh, well, this has been an exploration of mine since college. I mean, I've gone through lots of iterations of my own work around exercise.
Do you feel open to telling us a little bit?
I
more
mean, I
about
was
that?
just thinking, I guess, about, first and foremost, kind of my relationship with running, because I've gone through so many different seasons where I came into it with a lot of freedom, and I would say more in that birthright trusted place. And then I was such a performance oriented kid, though, because I just really wanted to please my dad. I think that was like, I don't know where I was of it at the time, but my sports were really about making my dad proud. And I think basketball was the place that it really manifested. And so running was kind of the thing I did off to the side. But then, of course, I was able to run at the collegiate level, and it just became just this total, all it became was becoming competent and masterful, and trying to make my dad proud, trying to make my coach proud, and just doing whatever it took to be great, harming myself, to do that. And it's just so sad when I think of it now. But the beautiful thing, and this actually answers, oftentimes people ask the question, when you've been really disordered in a particular sport, can you come back? Like, can you ever do it again? Or do you need to, do you need to stop? Are you never going to be able to reclaim that? And I didn't know, I did a lot of that journey on my own, to be honest. But I was pretty determined to see if I could heal that relationship. And, it makes me actually feel kind of emotional to think about it even right now, and the way that I have been able to not only reclaim it, but just have such a breadth of experience with that particular sport, where it can be something I can flexibly move from being super uber competitive, because I'm still a very competitive person, and I can train and try to have a badass race. I can run super, super slow with my daughter to just connect with her and to enjoy nature and talk with her. I can go out in the morning by myself and use it as time to contemplate and to think and to pray. I can go with a group of friends for connection and processing and catching up. So it just has all these iterations of it that I can kind of move in and out of. And I feel really grateful for that. And there's times that, I'm not able, I'm limited, and I'm not getting out there as much as I want to. And I feel disappointed and sad with that. And then it's okay. So, I didn't know that. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to reclaim it that way and move away from, a really disordered relationship where I did it for all of those things at one point, for shaping, for affect regulation, perfectionism, OCD. All of that was in my relationship with running. So, I think that's one of the reasons this particular podcast is so exciting to me, is that there's a lot of hope, if for people to heal and in that particular way in their movement. And not that anyone has to. I think if I would have come to a point where I was like, I don't like running, I could have left it, but I love it. I absolutely love it. And then I've added basketball I love basketball to get out some aggression.
Opal Owls.
Yeah, play with a team again.
You guys have a team. I forgot.
Oh, it's so great.
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
So great.
Little local park and rec.
Good
So
to know.
great. And then to Julie's point, I think I've recently taken I've taken some fitness classes to get some strength in my hip flexors and places that I just need to build strength to stay with my running. And I don't love I don't love those I don't love engaging in that. I feel some of the limitations of things I kind of have to tolerate to be in that, but I do it for kind of to take care of my body, to take care of some of the ways that it's changed with aging. And so I see it in a whole different way, that type of movement.
Yeah. I was thinking about that as self-care. That phrase gets tossed around all the time. And sometimes it honestly bothers me a little bit, because it just sounds like just about bathtubs and bubble baths and really sweet stuff. But like self-care can also be showing up and doing fitness stuff for your hip flexors, because you know that it matters for you.
Totally. It's like my PT.
Right. Right. Showing up to something that puts in some time and strengthens your relationship to yourself or to your body in whatever form that takes.
Totally.
Really important.
I don't know if it'd be okay to go back to this, but when you were sharing, Kara, I connect to the whys of our programming around the exercise and sport program at Opal, and why it is that then we allow for the clients to move.
Totally.
Because it's like, okay, well, how we want to be in that. You know, you did so much of that on your own in your own recovery process, but then we see it as such a rich time to be with our clients and to be able to hear all the things that they're having hopelessness about and hope about, and all the metaphor and all the things that come out in that. So I don't know if you want to share more about that, but I just wanted to make sure to say that, because I just think that is such a key thing that is honestly controversial in the eating disorder treatment world, as
Can you
if
explain
people
why?
should.
Because
Well,
people that don't know much about why people would or wouldn't move?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of saying, well, even though it's a birthright, not everyone thinks that, right? So it's like, well, this is something that somebody can stop doing. When they're pursuing eating disorder recovery, if exercise has been a problem, well, let's just eliminate that. And then they'll have to just focus on eating, And so I think there's just been more concern around if you allow for somebody to continue to exercise as they're pursuing eating disorder recovery, that would impede on their nutritional recovery or their mental and emotional energy and their recovery. I don't know if you'd add anything else, but that is a lot of the concern or the controversy. And we just found that people were doing it anyways, right? So we're in a PHP setting, so they're going to do it before 8 a.m. and after 6 p.m. So we might as well talk about what they're doing.
Yes.
And maybe do some of it with them.
And research now suggests that it's going to have better treatment results to allow people to participate in movement as part of higher level of care eating disorder treatment. So we're now following what research is proving by allowing people to do that. But if you think about it, if we don't touch that, that's an important part of their life. It's a birthright. It's a part of just being, that if we're not interacting with it and talking about it and working with it in an embodied way, we're missing a huge opportunity. Huge
and
opportunity.
we'd be pulling a potentially really joyful part of their lives.
Yes.
I mean, that might be life-giving to them.
Totally.
In the long run, and serve their recovery quite well.
Yes.
It can be motivating.
Yes. It brings up,
recover.
it brings up too the identity piece.
Yeah.
Identity as an athlete, identity as a mover. That could be something really integral in one's identity. And so to honor that, to understand it, to respect it. And if we don't get it, to ask questions. I mean, I think that's that I would say that's the gift that the biggest gift I can bring is to understand someone, to understand kind of instead of making assumptions. And I think that's huge when it comes to athlete identity. And a lot of times why athletes are afraid to get treatment is they don't think that, a treatment providers will understand them and understand that massive part of their identity. So it's important, really important to respect that.
What kinds of questions do you ask about it?
About identity?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's, I was just even thinking, all the ways that even things are different. Athletes, different between sports. Like me as a runner is different than, this client as a gymnast. Let me understand gymnastics, the sport. Let me understand gymnastics in the context of the way that you were raised with your particular school experience or club experience. There's so much to understand about
cross-cultural.
Yeah,
It is.
right.
In a way.
Totally. Big level to small level, right? Like in terms of the communities they've been a part of, and then their own internal world and their own their own identity, the way they see their identity internally. We do that lesson where we look at internal identity versus external identity. How do other people see them as an athlete or a mover? How do they see themselves? How have they seen themselves across time, past and present, and what they want in the future? And are there discrepancies? Desired identity, and why is there a gap between what they are now and in their desired identity? So there's just lots of ways to interact with it to understand these unique differences between people.
I love that list of questions. I was thinking earlier about the needs list and wondering, maybe for myself for sure, and then also for clients and for everyone that moves, when you're healing your relationship with movement, I think that it seems like it can be really easy to suddenly understand, oh my gosh, this has been serving all these needs for me. Let me figure out how to kind of start getting those needs met elsewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yep.
So it's all projected onto basketball.
Yeah.
Let me now try and figure out how to balance my life out some more and actually make some friends that aren't related to basketball or be excellent at some other thing, whatever. I know that I've done this before. I've suddenly gotten those needs met elsewhere. And then I'm like, well, why move? Why move still? Or how do I have an imagination? I feel like we've talked about that some in terms of what do we each individually need right now, and how is that being reflected in movement.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious if you have more to say about kind of that avoidance all of a sudden and what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we focus more on the compulsion part of things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a lot of curiosity and experimentation, because if someone then would kind of go to the other way of, gosh, I have all these needs met elsewhere, I don't feel any interest in moving, with the basic assumption that we're born to move, I'd be curious about that. Well, I think that would be, I think the assumption is that there's going to be an appetite for moving. It might not be as big as yourself, right? Like, in comparison, but that's the basic assumption I'm going to use. So if somebody is not, if they're, if they're actively avoiding movement, I would just, again, be digging and understanding a little bit more, because often the avoidance is a reactivity to something. And when I think of needs getting met through sport, one of the things I think it gets tricky is, well, you can see if only a couple of them are getting met through sport, you might want to be thinking of expanding more needs within sport. It could be looking at having needs met outside of sport. A lot of it, diversifying helps, right? Not having all of our eggs in one basket helps. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought on that, but I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. Diversifying, though, where you're getting your needs met, can be a way to kind of rethink.
Yeah, and not have the avoidance happen, maybe,
totally.
too.
And
right,
I remember what I was
say.
going to say. The one thing, too, about sport is you get injured, right? And then that takes you out of it. And so when we're thinking about needs, it also helps to think of how do we establish some of those things that aren't external or performance oriented. Identity, too. Identity and needs being met, so that there are some kind of stakes in the ground that wouldn't be stripped away by performance being gone. So whether that's in academia or sports or theater, or if that gets taken away, what are things kind of relationally or internally that kind of meet the needs, or are composed of our identity, that can provide some stability. We did a little identity exploration in our this body image talk that we did with these fourth and fifth grade girls, and how they did a lot of different little clusters of where identity can come from, so that you can get identity from so many different parts of your life. And the idea is that it makes your identity really strong, because if one gets pulled for some reason, then you have a lot more parts of your identity to keep it strong.
And this
is
is
a craft project in line with that. Sorry.
I love that.
This is bringing up, Kara, in my mind, radically open dialectical behavioral therapy. And Kara and I we're working on kind of the overlap between RODBT, over control, and athletes in particular, and how probably a lot of athletes are over-controlled, high achieving athletes, because OC will serve them quite well in their sport, in all kinds of ways. And just thinking about, from an RODBT framework, we would think about connection. Is the sport taking precedent over connection? Is there true vulnerability happening?
Right.
Is the person openly expressing and finding authentic connection? Or is the sport kind of taking over their world?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that would go into the differences between team culture. And some team cultures might be open to vulnerability and expression of a more open human existence, and some would be more judgmental of
more
that,
perfectionistic
and closed off. I think one of the hard things with athletes is the limitation of time, because often it's hard to explore when you're in the midst of sport and school. For a student athlete, it's hard to do experimentation and to build communities outside of that, literally, for the limitation of time. I mean, I remember my coach said, what was this famous line? You can only do you're a student, you're an athlete, and you're a social being, and you can only do 2 of the 3 well, or something
Wow.
like that. And I remember him telling me that you can only do 2 of the 3 well because we don't have
don't have enough time.
all the time in the world. So I think that's a real limitation and difficulty of athletes having the ability to do some of that development while they're in sport, which is why I feel so interested in supporting coaches, because if they can do it in the context of sport, for coaches to give the message that this is important, this work is important. It's important to develop the athlete in these particular ways so that they're more ready when they're retired, where they're more ready if they get injured.
And won't that help sport performance too?
Yes.
Right, Kara?
Yes.
So the inner athletes in me is thinking like, if I'm feeling filled up in all aspects of my life, I'm going to rock it on the court,
Yes, mental
so that's
health
interesting
is
that
a part of sport
coaches
performance.
would think that way from a sports psychology
I
standpoint,
know,
right?
I know. And it is some get it and some it's a tough sell. But I can't say that enough. I think mental health, even if you have super genetic talent and great work ethic, mental health is a big component. It can, it can harm performance.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with you. Gets me excited.
And I mean, when you're feeling connected to your tribe and your team, like your performance is going to be so much stronger, right?
Yeah.
I was just thinking the opposite for myself. I was always better at this horrid soccer team. It was fine. I was always better when I was angry, which is interesting. Like again, with these needs being met, that if I'm like really happy, I feel like maybe I would do something else other than soccer, right? But like maybe again, that was not my thing to be doing. But these needs are so different for everybody.
Yeah.
And if I was probably more connected on the team, I'd probably want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thinking about 15-year-old me.
I have this one other thing that might become a whole different podcast. So maybe I'll just leave it there and bring it up later. Or are we actually?
What is
I don't know. Well, it's just thinking that the listener might be thinking, okay, you haven't talked one thing about why people exercise for health.
Yeah.
And that people do exercise for health, and is like, I don't know, the birthright piece. From my standpoint, being the dietitian that does a lot of attunement work,
Totally.
like there is a reason that we have attunement skills in our own body, our own food and body wisdom that moves us to then eat and nourish ourselves. And I think in the same way, this birthright concept is that same, like it's out of that we become well.
Yeah.
Is that birthright? It's the same sort of overflow of attunement into the movement world. But I don't think most people think about movement and exercise and that benefits health just because it's an overflow of someone being well. I think people see more that you move, therefore you're well. But if you are sedentary, you will not be well. So anyway, it feels like
that. Doesn't that feel like a combo with something you want to do in the future with the Hayes topic too?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about it. I don't know. I just was thinking, like, what would you say to the listener that's like, okay, this is all fine and good, and I exercise to take care of my body to be well and healthy, and that is my strongest motivator, and that's what people do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, there's so many different offshoots of that
I know.
I think we could get into, but at this point, I'm thinking like with the avoidance of exercise, I think there's an assumption that if we didn't feel forced to eat well, or if we didn't feel
that we wouldn't do it,
right? Yeah,
but we
if
have to be in fear. That goes back to that.
Yeah.
What breaks our trust? Well, it's going to be fear based. Gosh, well, if I don't do it,
I'm
going to
die. I know.
Right. But if you're really,
I'm going to die. Oh my gosh.
yeah, if you're really attuned to yourself,
Yes.
you don't really want to sit on the couch all day.
I know,
probably.
exactly.
And maybe there are some
Or
limitations
maybe you do
that keep
some
you there.
days.
Some,
And you do
some
but
days,
it's
but
but
every
it's but it's
day-
big picture, right?
No,
It's
right.
like that's where people. I think there's this fear that I'll never want to move again, and I'm going to be on the couch all day, every day for the rest of my life.
No.
That's just not the way we're born.
Yeah.
We're not.
Yeah.
It's not.
Even if you're really super sick for a week and you're on the couch, you eventually, if you start getting better, which we hope that you do, you start saying, oh, I think I want to go for a walk.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I could walk to the kitchen, or I
Yeah.
could walk down the block, or whatever. Your body starts reacting to the thing that it's been doing
Right.
for a week, which was the couch, and then it
Right.
It balances things
And
out.
just to say, because I think this is important for listeners to hear, if you have a more compulsive relationship to exercise, the pendulum does often swing in the opposite direction where there is a pretty significant avoidance, but it goes back. It does
goes back.
not stay
Right.
on that side. And I think there's so much fear of, oh my gosh, now I don't want to move at all. I have no interest. I am,
Right.
oh, this
Maybe
is
you've
really
overdone it.
scary.
I'll just be
I'm never going to want to
lazy.
do it again.
I'll
And
just
I'm
be
so
lazy.
lazy. There's so much fear around that end that
Right.
there's not the belief that it can go back to the end and
Right.
find that balance.
Right.
And I think I
Yeah.
have a lot of trust that it does.
Yeah.
A lot of trust that it does.
I think so too.
It's like introducing foods
it's-
back in, right?
yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's like this inner work around what needs are being met, but that there's also sort of this sense of like what motivates one
right.
to move. And I think that's like, no, there's a combination of probably both that then won't have somebody stay on the couch all day.
Yeah. And if you're tending to your mental health too, once you start wanting to move and you can't do it perfectly, you hopefully are dealing with whatever shame comes up from that or whatever emotion comes up from that.
Totally.
And then you figure out some way to engage still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's fun to talk about.
I know. There's lots more.
I know.
More to come
Just lots of
in
seeds.
Sports and Exercise podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation around movement as birthright. You're going to find just one extra little thing at the end of these thank yous, so make sure you stay around for that. But first, thank you to Jack Straw Cultural Center for sound engineering, to Aaron Davidson for the Appetites music, and to Opal's Sarah Taylor for production assistance and editing. You can find more episodes and subscribe to The Appetite on iTunes. Learn more about Opal at opalfoodandbody.com and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This is adapted from The Eater's Agreement, created by Mark David, founder of the Institute for the Psychology of Eating. Kara loved it so much that she just adapted it slightly, replacing the word eater with mover, becoming the Mover's Agreement. I hereby agree, from this day forward, to fully participate in life on Earth. I agree to inhabit the appropriate vehicle for such participation, a body. As a requisite for the sustaining of that body and of the life that dwells therein, I agree to be a mover. This agreement fully binds me for the duration of my stay on Earth. As a mover, I agree to move. I agree to have a body that needs movement. I recognize that as the biological need to move is fulfilled with greater awareness and efficiency, the benefits of my well-being will increase. I further acknowledge that ignorance of the movement process may cause undesirable consequences. Because the essence of my participation in life is one of learning and exploration, I agree to experience uncertainty as a mover. I recognize there are a great variety of movements to choose from, and I may not know which to participate in. I may have a choice of different movement approaches and not know which to follow. I may have an assortment of habits and not know how to manage them. I recognize that my relationship with movement is a learning process, and I will inevitably make mistakes. Therefore, as a mover, I agree to accept my humanness and learn as I go along. I acknowledge that as the body changes from infancy to old age, so will the movement process change. I recognize that my body may call for different types of movement as the days, seasons, and years progress. My movement needs will also shift in accord with changes in my lifestyle and environment. I understand that there is no one perfect movement plan. As a mover, I accept pain. I recognize that I may suffer pain when the body is disturbed by my choice of movement or exercise habits. I may also experience pain when emotional and spiritual hungers are confused with movement hunger. I further understand that moving to cure a pain that cannot be remedied by moving may bring even more pain. I further agree to accept a body that is imperfect and vulnerable, that naturally decays with the passage of time. I recognize there will be moments when I am incapable of caring for myself. I agree, then, to live in a body is to need the help of others. I also agree to be vulnerable as a mover. I acknowledge that I will be helpless as an infant and will need to be given opportunities to move. I may be equally helpless when I am old and unwell. Therefore, as a mover, I agree to be nourished by others. As a mover, I acknowledge the domain of the sacred. I recognize that the act of moving may be ritualized and inspired. It may be given symbolic meanings that are religious or spiritual in nature. It may even be joyous. I further agree that moving is an activity that joins me with all humanity. I recognize that to be a mover is to be accountable for the care of the earth and its resources. I acknowledge that despite our differences, we are all ultimately nourished by the same source. As such, I agree to share. I recognize that at its deepest level, moving is an affirmation of life. Each time I move, I agree somewhere inside to continue life on earth. I acknowledge that this choice to move is a fundamental act of love and nourishment, a true celebration of my existence. As a human being on earth, I agree to be a mover. I choose life again and again and again.